My name is Tom Shepstone. I'm pleased to be with you today to talk about the Upper Delaware Land and Water Use Guidelines. These guidelines came about many years ago. They started really when there was talk about taking this beautiful river and making it a national scenic and recreational river. And I'm standing here at 10 Mile River Access. It's a beautiful spot. I've canoed past here before, but there's a lot to this river valley, including the distant lands here to the west, that ridge line. And there's a lot of interest going back to the 1970s, or actually 1960s, about preserving the character of this area, because this is the last free-flowing major river east of the Mississippi. And there used to be a site for potential hydroelectric dams, for example, and a number of people wanted to make sure that didn't happen. They wanted to make sure this river was continued to be free-flowing. And so there was interest in making it a scenic river. And in 1973, a study was done of the river, a very thin study, actually about 30 pages, that was intended to identify whether or not this was practical as a scenic river. And it identified a type of management plan, which would be what we call nodes of management by the Park Service, interspersed with large distances of private lands that would be kept in their more or less their rural character through zoning. This was not a new concept. It had been done in the St. Croix River, for example, in Minnesota many years ago. And at the time this was proposed, there was some controversy about it, but it was accepted as something that was going to be studied. And in fact, later on, a couple years later, it was studied in depth. But in the meantime, I happen to be county planner in Wayne County, and I am a consulting planner these days. I represented at one time or another every one of the municipalities along this river, and I've done work for the various counties as well, and including one of the states. The work that I did as a county planner back in 1973 through 75 was a time when we were trying to figure out what this was all about. So the various county planners, including myself, we organized an ad hoc group called the Upper Delaware Clearinghouse. Kind of a crazy name, but we came up with it as a way just to share information with one another about this unusual thing that was about to happen. And it was probably one of the first instances we had regionally of working together across state lines. So we had the county planners, and we started inviting in other people such as local landowners, local planners. We had people representing the canoeing industry, which was very big at that time. And we got together to talk about, well, how would we go about this? And we looked at the St. Croix River, and we saw that this nodal concept had been implemented there, and they had developed and published some guidelines, very simple guidelines for land and water use. And so we took a look at those, and we said, well, let's see if we can't do the same thing here on our own before the Park Service even comes to town. So that's what happened. We got together and put together a set of guidelines prior to the Park Service coming to town, as I said. And we actually had public meetings on them up and down the river from Hancock all the way down to Port Jervis. And we gathered input and we revised them. And we had those ready in 1975 when the Park Service actually came to town to do its full-scale study. So we had a jump start on it. When the Park Service came to town about 1978, they were following up on the study that had been done in 76 or so, and they immediately put together a team to work together to develop a full-scale management plan for the river, which included land and water use guidelines. So I was invited to be part of that, as were a number of other people that were involved in the clearinghouse. And we put together a committee again, a slightly different committee, and we updated the guidelines. We made them a little bit more specific. We adjusted a few things here and there, and we put them out for public comment. And generally, they were accepted. Unfortunately, what happened when we completed that second set of guidelines was that the Park Service got a little ahead of its game, and they were the head of the team, and they started going out and trying to sell the guidelines to municipalities before it was time, and that's my opinion. And it caused a huge uproar, and what happened was we had 800 people coming to one public meeting, as I recall, who were very upset, and in particular about certain aspects of the guidelines. So what we had to do was to go back to the drawing board, and by that I mean that the local folks got together and formed their own organization called the Council of Upper Delaware Towns, and they hired a totally different consulting team to prepare a new management plan to replace the one the Park Service had developed and new guidelines. And oddly enough, they hired me to help with that as well. So what happened was that we took the same guidelines and we went through them and we came up with a different approach. That approach was to detail certain goals and objectives, and then to offer these guidelines as various alternatives to meeting those objectives and those goals. And it worked out very well. It took a long time, it was tough going, but I'm glad it was tough going. As one of the other former supervisors in the Valley said, if we hadn't had that opposition, we would have never come to the good set of guidelines that I think we have, that are very workable and are respected by the local officials. And they've worked out very well, I think, on the whole. The Upper Delaware Council, which was formed out of the River Management Plan, to specifically continue this local input into the process and to make sure management was a partnership with the Park Service and not a Park Service imposition, essentially took over that job of administering these guidelines. And as a result, they were generally accepted. And what we have today is an adopted river management plan, adopted guidelines that were done, as I said, more than 30 years ago. But they are, I think, very accepted by most of the municipalities, and they are a true public-private partnership that came as a result of a lot of controversy. So controversy can be good, and that's how the guidelines were born. The guidelines are very flexible. They allow a lot of different things. There are very specific objectives that have to be met, but there are alternatives for meeting those objectives. And what the Upper Delaware Council is doing today is trying to take those guidelines and make them more understandable, therefore more enforceable by common consent. And what they've done is put together an excellent workbook, guidebook, call it what you wish, which allows people to understand the guidelines. It's very graphically well done, very digestible for somebody trying to understand things. And they are doing this video to try to explain what this is all about. What it's about is a partnership that preserves this river valley so that we don't see something on top of that ridge line, and we get the same kind of character we see right now, which is largely wooded but not completely. It also allows for settlement areas where economic development can take place, and it provides many choices for people to implement these goals and objectives that we've adopted. So the Upper Delaware Council, I think, is on a roll here with respect to making sure that these guidelines are well understood, that they are easily used by municipalities, and they avoid what was originally the idea, long before that 1973 study I talked about. The scenic river at that time was thought about as something that would be condemned. You know, you'd have 75,000 acres of land that would be condemned and preserved. Well, that wasn't feasible, and what we came up with was an alternative, and that alternative only allows condemnation where there's not substantial conformance with these guidelines and something is truly threatened. What that means in practicality is these guidelines, this plan, depends upon a mutual relationship with the local officials. The local officials have to buy into it, and in fact they have, and that's the beauty of these guidelines.